telling Ukraine they have very valuable rare earth. We want what we put up to go in terms of a guarantee. We want a guarantee. We're handing them money hand over fist. We're giving them equipment. European is not keeping up with us. They should equalize. And look, we have an ocean in between. They don't. It's more important for them than it is for us. But they're way below us in terms of money. And they should be paying at least equal. They should really be paying much more than us. But let's say equal to us. And they're billions and billions of dollars below. So we're looking to do a deal with Ukraine where they're going to secure what we're giving them with their rare earth and other things.
So on the Ukraine war front, the breaking news just out this morning is that the armed forces of Ukraine made a new attempt at a counteroffensive in the Kursk region. On the morning of February 6th, Ukrainian troops began offensive operations from the Kolmakov farm. This was reported by Russian media RIA Novosti. The Ukrainian military took a course to the village of Plehovo. For this breakthrough, they reportedly used NATO-made armored vehicles, including American Abrams tanks. At the same time, 2 demining trolls, 4 tanks, and about 10 armored combat vehicles were involved. Russian media reports that the Ukrainian troops have already suffered significant losses near the village of Ulanok, where they have lost several pieces of Western equipment. So more on that later, and we will discuss the purpose of this new Ukrainian counteroffensive. Meanwhile, President Trump presented a terrifying business plan for Ukraine, or so it was described. The President of the United States has clarified the issue of further assistance to Kiev. He does not intend to give money just like that, and what has already been spent should be compensated. Americans need access to rare earth resources, and they were given special conditions: what deposits are expected in Washington, and what to do with the fact that most of them are already controlled by Russia.
We did this to control the 11 trillion of minerals under the Donbass. We did it to grind down the Russian war machine on the grist of Ukrainian teenagers. We did it to hand out hundreds of billions of dollars to U.S. hedge funds who are, as we speak, carving up rights to Ukraine's fertile soil and vast mineral resources.
According to Trump, a country that has invested hundreds of billions of dollars in Ukraine is entitled to some compensation. And lastly, I discussed former Chancellor of Germany and a participant in the negotiations to the Minsk agreements, Angela Merkel's bold statement about Russia. Specifically, Merkel called to prevent the victory of the Russian Federation in Ukraine. She said this at an event organized by the newspaper Die Zeit. In quotations, "With this very balanced decisions on which weapons to supply and which are not to supply, Biden showed that it is right to think about how we can support Ukraine so that Russia does not win this war and that we still act with caution," she said, answering the question about the refusal of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz to supply the Taurus systems. At the same time, Merkel supported this policy of the Chancellor and said that he had good reasons for it. Olaf Scholz has repeatedly stated that Germany will not supply Taurus long-range missiles to Ukraine and give Kiev permission to use its weapons to hit targets on the territory of Russia. Russia believes that the supply of weapons to Ukraine interferes with the settlement, directly involves NATO countries in the conflict, and is a game with fire. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov noted that any cargo that contains weapons for Ukraine would become a legitimate target for Russia. So this is my first video for this new channel entitled Whips Geopolitics. This, however, is my second YouTube channel. The first one was called simply What's Hidden in Plain Sight, or Whips, and covered the Ukraine war with frontline updates. However, due to YouTube censorship and eventual demonetization, I will now focus on this channel, which, while still covering the Ukraine war, will do so from a geopolitical angle while still covering any major events on the front line, such as what is now happening in Kursk. So I hope you enjoy this content, and remember to hit the notification bell like button, and most of all, subscribe to help grow this channel and boost it in the algorithm. So let's get into it. A column of 400 Ukrainian fighters on NATO equipment was seen moving from the Suzancy district in the direction of the Belovsky district. Russian military recruiters report that the Ukrainian enemy began to advance in small groups along the route from Makhnovka. At the moment, there are active battles on the approaches to the village of Ulanok. The armed forces of Russia repelled the attacks of 3 battalions of the armed forces of Ukraine at once, trying to break through on tanks and armored vehicles. Aviation and artillery of the Russian armed forces also work on them. Operators of unmanned aerial vehicles or UAVs hit the Ukrainians' manpower clusters, but weather conditions seriously complicate the task. The authors of the Telegram channel Archangel of Special Forces noticed that the battles in this area are particularly intense. There are battles near the village of Ulanok. The fighting is heavy. The weather conditions for the operation of the UAVs are bad, the channel said. Military officer Yuri Kotenok reported that the Ukrainian troops do not weaken the onslaught, trying to advance on one of the sites, while he did not name the specific settlements and the direction followed by the armed forces of Ukraine. It cannot be ruled out that in parallel with the onslaught near the settlement of Ulanok, Ukrainian troops will want to move to one of the district centers of the Kursk region, that is, the village of Yushkovo. Military blogger Mikhail Vinchuk put forward his assumption in this regard. He noted that the armed forces of Ukraine would probably want to expand the counteroffensive. This is evidenced by the fact that, unlike fierce battles for Ulanok, the Ukrainian army did not try to gain a foothold near Cherkasky, Konopelka, and Fanasivka, advancing deep into the region. A possible goal of the new offensive of the armed forces of Ukraine near Kursk was to strike the operators of unmanned aerial vehicles. This goal was named as possible by the authors of the Telegram channel North Wind, related to the military. According to the publication, Ukraine may try to push away the UAV operators of the Russian armed forces from the captured armed forces of Ukraine, as they regularly strike Ukrainian equipment in the occupied district center of the Kursk region. The Ukrainian enemy is trying to push back our drones, the publication says. Now, as explained by the press secretary of the National Security Council, Brian Hughes, the White House found a solution to the issue of appropriate compensation for America's heavy investment into Ukraine, that is, rare earth metals. According to the Financial Times, Kiev does not mind. Washington was offered special conditions for cooperation on key natural resources. In quotations, this means exceptional preferences, minimum tax rates, artificially low price of raw materials, so that the United States can not only reduce the cost of manufacturing electronic equipment, but also receive large income from the resale of rare earth metals. Environmental standards will also be relaxed, which will allow not to invest in expensive environmental protection equipment. That is, maximizing profits at the expense of Ukraine, explains Yulia Davidova, director of the Center for Social and Political Studies of the REU. Trump's plans were also commented on in Moscow. This is a commercial offer, Kremlin press secretary Dmitry Peskov told journalists. Access to rare earth metals is very important for the White House. Back in the summer of 2023, China, their main supplier to the world market, reduced the export of gallium and germanium, which are necessary for chips and communication equipment. As a result, the prices of strategic resources have almost doubled. According to the calculations of the US Geological Survey, China accounts for 98% of the world's total gallium production and 60% of uranium. In addition, there is at least 85% of the capacity for processing rare earth ores. In December 2024, Beijing tightened the screws even more, completely banning the export of gallium, germanium, antimony, and some super hard materials to the United States, key for the electronics and arms industries. Experts pointed out that there are such deposits in America, but there is no mining. Further development of high technologies in the United States without interaction with the PRC is impossible. Beijing is the leader in the supply of rare earth metals to the American market. Out of 47 commodity items, more than 50%, in 25 categories, China is the largest or only supplier, says Kazimierz Belkarev, Associate Professor of IMEB at the Faculty of Economics of the People's Friendship University of Russia. The State Department agreed it is urgent to diversify and eliminate dependence on Beijing. Now they are looking for alternative sources of raw materials, in particular in Canada. Rare earth metals are also mined in Russia, Japan, Belgium, South Korea, the USA, Canada, and Kazakhstan, and in Ukraine. According to Kiev, there are about 5% of the world's reserves of particularly important raw materials. 17 positions are rare earth metals, including scandium, strontium, zirconium, lithium, and beryllium. But the Kiev regime has already lost the main deposits, more than 70% in the DPR and LPR, as well as in the Dnipro region, to which the front line is rapidly expanding. To be specific, the largest deposits of lithium and titanium are located in the Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions. Kiev recently lost control of a strategically important lithium deposit south of Kursk. As a result, Kiev lost its status as the holder of the largest reserves of this metal in Europe. Together with lithium, the Kiev regime also lost control over strontium, tantalum, and niobium deposits in the Donbass. There are large deposits of uranium and zirconium in the Dnipropetrovsk region, which the Russian army is already approaching, and where constant strikes are destroying the industrial infrastructure. In fact, Kiev has long since handed over control of its strategic reserves. Enslavement began with a contract signed under the pretext of promising investments in the country. Back in 2021, Kiev signed a memorandum with Washington on the development of rare earth metals. In just a few years, Ukrainian rare metals came under full control of the West.
European Union until 2050, and today the Russian Defense Ministry reported another.
Russia deprived the West of access to many resources, thwarting the plans of the United States and Britain to reimburse costs. We are talking about large deposits of lithium, coal, and uranium, which have long been under the control of Russia, emphasizes Responsible Statecraft, a publication of the American think tank, the Quincy Institute of Responsible Public Administration. Natural resources in the territories that by will, on a democratic basis, returned home as part of Russia, cannot be the subject of bargaining. They are subject to the state sovereignty of Russia, Belkarev notes. At the same time, it is not a fact that foreigners will extract resources where something remains, experts believe. Thus, the map of rare earth metals from the Dixie Group organization indicates strontium deposits in the eastern part of Ukraine, zirconium in the central part, scandium in the western part, beryllium deposits in the northern part, lithium deposits in the southern part of Ukraine. Moreover, the reserves of the latter, according to preliminary estimates, are 500,000 tons. Even if the United States and Ukraine conclude a deal of weapons in exchange for subsoil, it will not affect the global market of rare earth metals. All its participants understand perfectly well the domination of China in the next few years will not be able to break the states for sure, the analyst adds. Ultimately, observers state Washington's proposed scheme means only one thing: Ukraine will no longer receive anything for free, and it will have to pay a high price for help. Moreover, the willingness of the Kiev authorities to give valuable resources shows their extremely humiliating position in relations with the United States. And with this approach, as Bloomberg notes, the country will soon everything, only bones will remain.
Дональд Трамп висловив зацікавлення щодо рідкоземельних металів, які є в Україні.
Дійсно, у нас один із пунктів, важливий пункт, економічний пункт, який є в плані перемоги, це дійсно наші не тільки рідкоземельні, а в цілому інвестиції, безумовно, в корисні копалини України. У нас їх достатньо. І ви бачите, що Росія ще з 2014 року окупувала наші землі. Частково там були дійсно великі об'єми наших корисних копалин. І ми відкриті до того, що все це може бути і розроблено з нашими партнерами, які і допомагають нам захистити нашу землю, і штовхають ворога назад своєю